All right, it's that time again for a little bit of weekly Common Sense coming at you from Channel 511, Studio C, Common Sense, Ohio, or you can check us out at commonsenseohioshow.com. It is March 1. We've leapt into March 1. You see what I did there? Because yesterday was February 29. That doesn't exist except during leap year. So we've leapt right into March here, and March Madness is around the corner. And in order to deal with all that madness, common sense. So here we are again, brought to you by Harper Plus Accounting. And I know they're busy, but believe it or not, as busy as they are, I had tax questions. I called up, I got answers. As busy as they are, I sent an email, they responded. Not only, not just on my tax stuff, like something else, sort of unrelated, ancillary, but required some input from my accountants on my income stream and some other things. They were able to respond even during the underwater tax season, or even while they're underwater during tax season, they were able to help out. So check out Harper Plus for your accounting needs. We've got George Pardos here again. He's anybody who tuned in a couple, it was been 3 weeks, George, 2 or 3 weeks ago. He came in and we were going to talk about the border and some of the National Guard and the military, sort of get a different perspective when you came in last time. We got sidetracked on all the other stuff. And I don't mean to say it was sidetracked on bad stuff. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, but we've invited George back today to give us some commentary on the border. But before that, as everybody knows, I've been studiously following World War II, this day in World War II history. So March 1st in World War II history, 1943. Taking a little bit different tack this week because, it's not always that there was a breaking battle in World War II. And, as a history major, I sort of came from the school where you study people on the ground. So I was always fascinated by what the soldier would experience, George, or what was Eisenhower doing when he made the decisions? Not like actually, where was he? Was he having coffee? Was he having drinks with who? And so, I find that stuff sort of fascinating, but because I think it does influence our daily decisions and certainly our historic decisions. But today's a little bit different. On March 1, 1943, an estimated 2,200 people crowded into the New York's Madison Square Garden, and a further 15,000 stood outside in a rally addressed by the World Jewish Congress, President Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, who is the head of the American Jewish Congress. Other speakers included various people. But the idea was they were sort of asking the world to take action. They were asking the United States to take some action to deal with the oppression and the violence and, frankly, the killing of the Jews in Europe by the Nazis. And an interesting quote, I found this sort of, we always say history repeats itself, and some interesting foreshadowing was going on here. He says that, the time for prudence and caution is past. We must speak up like men. And how can we ask our Christian friends to lift their voices in protest against the wrong suffered by the Jews if we keep silent? What is happening in Germany today may happen tomorrow in any other land on earth unless it is challenged and rebuked. It is not the German Jews who are being attacked. It is the Jews. Unfortunately, how many ever years later, it seems like there's some of that maybe more of that than we like going on in mainstream, really, mainstream media, mainstream, or on the universities, et cetera. So anyway, look, and this is not to say that discrimination the other way is okay either, but certainly the Jews are under attack. I think that they may be the closest allies to the West for, how long now. And,
in that region, that's about it.
Yeah, that's it. So anyway, a little bit of interesting, maybe a sideways glance of World War II, but certainly some of the political perspective that was going on.
Yeah, so, one of the most notorious things that happened during that period was a whole, literally a boatload on the St. Louis. Jewish refugees sailed from Europe to the United States, to Cuba, to either Argentina or Brazil, but they tried various ports. Everybody turned them away. And the rabbi you just mentioned was one of the people that called on FDR. Let the St. Louis unload these people, give them asylum, and FDR refused. And Cuba refused. They had to sail back to Europe, go back to Germany, and many of the people on that boat that FDR turned away were later killed in concentration camps. Mm-hmm. They came this close to freedom. And that is a terrible scourge in our history.
What is not often discussed about FDR is his close association and correspondence with the Nazis prior to World War II.
Big time.
I mean, the Nazis actually looked upon him or looked upon our sort of Margaret Sanger eugenics movement as they developed their final solution and how to deal with their Aryan supremacy and all this other BS. You know, it's like
right. It was Mrs. Roosevelt who went flying with the Tuskegee Airmen to show America that blacks could be trained to do technical jobs like fly fighter planes.
Right. Imagine that.
Right. You know, and
exactly.
like human men could become soldiers. Right.
So
imagine.
she was screwing with her own husband with that entire
that relationship
mission.
is like a whole series of shows.
No
and
question.
you also got to remember, it wasn't during that time with Montford Point Marines. It was the first time in the history of the Marine Corps that they had black Marines. So during that time, they were training in Montford Point, North Carolina. The first black Marines were being trained.
Yeah.
So from 1943-44 on, they were giving blacks the opportunity to join the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps prior to that had no blacks in it at all whatsoever.
It seems so.
The military led the way towards integration
of
any other institution. You can go back to the Buffalo Soldiers that were in the cavalry, right, out west, and and performed brilliantly.
Well, and even in the Civil War.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, there's some fascinating history there, and those who think FDR is the darling of freedom and
in fact, Steve, if you don't mind,
yeah,
the first American killed in the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks.
Crispus Attucks. Yeah.
A black man was the very first casualty. So anyway.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, an interesting tidbit from World War II history that maybe not the typical stuff, but I think
it's important.
All the more relevant today.
I will say just really quick about this Hamas Israeli war that's happening. We had talked when that first occurred back, what's it been, 5 months ago, that at least I was hoping that the IDF would go in there and do a very difficult job, kind of like how we had to do in Iraq, and do a very difficult job of clearing an urban area that's very hazardous to the soldiers. But I was hoping they wouldn't carpet bomb Gaza. It turns out they've killed 30,000 Gazans, and most of those are not Hamas, right?
Yeah.
And that bothers me a lot. And I am not criticizing Netanyahu for getting revenge and for trying to go after Hamas because they're insidious.
Well, it's not just revenge.
No question about
right.
it.
I mean,
and you
at some point, you've got to deal with the problem.
If you kill 2,000 people or 3,000 people like they did,
that's an act of war.
No question. And then you don't get to say back to them, "Oh, this isn't the kind of war that we had planned on."
While you were shielding yourself with innocent civilians.
Right. But I just want to say that So I'm not calling for anything. I'm not educated enough to know.
Right. You're
but
pointing
30,000.
It's tragic by any measure.
That's
right.
That's an unbelievable number.
Yeah. Well, George, I mean, what is your thought? Just to ambush you here a little bit. You've got the Hamas sort of creating military strongholds literally underneath civilian hospitals and other places. It sort of shackles the military in a way that is just patently unfair. I mean, what do you do with that? I mean, what's the soldier's perspective on that?
I'm going to take back to what you were talking about World War II for a second.
Okay.
So we have bases in a place overseas in Japan called Okinawa. So Okinawa, and the reason I'm going to bring this up is to segue into Okinawa had underground bunkers, underground tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
When that was the first time that we had in history that we had to have an invading force deal with underground tunnels was in Bougainville, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, Okinawa, and Tarawa, and Saipan. So the Japanese were entrenched. That's a kind of warfare that they were using, and they saw that it was very effective. Fast forward to the French in Vietnam, the Vietnamese used the same kind of warfare, and they did it very effectively. So you now have seen, the world has seen, and non-state actors and state actors have seen that bunker tactics work. Now, we didn't use that in World War II. No other country used it other than Japan. Germany fought out in the open. They fought with tanks. They fought with, but no other country used it except for the Japanese. And when we invaded Okinawa, we had a higher casualty rate than we had at Iwo Jima, even though Iwo Jima was a smaller. We had more forces in Iwo Jima. Go to Okinawa, we have to invade, and then we carpet bombed the equivalent of whatever you want to say it. We bombed what's called White Beach in order for us to have a landing force. So Hamas has, warriors follow warriors. Hamas has said, okay, listen, we're going to build tunnels. Tunnels are effective. You can move personnel, you can move troops, you can move guns. And one of the things about Hamas, and I'm going to point this out, so every day you see caches that people have found that in Gaza, and this is the way they fight. You wind up putting a cache in, you give a fighter an 8-point grid coordinate. They know exactly where it is. They fight for one, they put on their kit, they, put rounds down range, get some trigger time, shoot at the IDF, take all their stuff off, drop it. Then they go to the next cache, put another kit on, and then fire again. And they do this over and over again because they have the tunnel system to support them. So when they send in the IDF, they send in their military into these tunnel systems. They don't, the 30,000, I'm going to say this, I don't think that's accurate.
It's a UN statistic. So.
But how many of those are Hamas fighters?
Oh.
How many of them are?
So you mean of the 30,000, they might be just saying that they were not fighters.
Right. And then,
sort of like Vietnam. Right.
Yeah. And it's sort of like Vietnam. So the RAND, when you get a chance, read about how the RAND Corporation does what's called force projection in a theater about casualties. So you have a Hamas fighter. He drops his kit. All he needs is a cell phone. You have a command and control center. They tell you, okay, here's the next one. You go it's like, I'm going to fight you at Papa Joe's. Let's say we had an insurgency. I'm at Papa Joe's on campus. Then I'm going to go down to let's say Roosters. I'm going to go to different places and pick up another kit to fight. Yeah. So now you're playing, the IDF is playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And so
like the Viet Cong did, the same guy you see out in the paddy during the daytime acting like a farmer, right, is a soldier at night.
And if you take a look at what we did at Way City, look at Quang Province, people came in and out, and they're like, where are these guys coming from? So the tunnel systems, we had to bomb the tunnel systems. Then we did what's called Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2, which in modern warfare has been the golden standard of bombing. And that was under Nixon, 1971-72. You had Linebacker 1, which is the unilateral bombing of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And in no other country in the world has had more ordnance dropped on it than Laos. Now, in modern warfare, everybody copies that system. And it doesn't matter whether you're American, English, French, that is the gold standard of dropping ordnance on a, whatever you want to call it, a local force.
Well, George, going back to your examples of the Japanese tunnel system, we were so freaked out at the White House and at the Pentagon about the Japanese and their tactics of fighting until they're dead, right? Very few prisoners were taken at Iwo Jima, for example, right? So we were so freaked out, to use your point about linebacker and arc light B-52 drops, we used atom bombs twice on Japan for the reasons that you're bringing up. The larger reasons is that they were going to energize the entire population, to include children, to kill Marines on the beaches.
Right, but and also you point out with that, we dropped 2 atom bombs, but we dropped more ordnance on Tokyo,
conventional,
than the damage of the atom bombs.
Firebomb, and it killed more people.
And it killed more people in Tokyo. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We
It
dropped
killed more people in Tokyo.
I knew there was a significant. There was a lot of. I didn't know it killed more.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then so I got to tell you this. I was in Sasebo, Japan, and they still had, when I was there in the 80s, they had signs, no Americans allowed. Really? So I mean, just if you're 45 miles away from where they dropped a couple atom bombs, I could see where you're kind of upset about that.
Yeah.
And
it was a guy from Columbus, Curtis LeMay, who orchestrated those bombing campaigns on Japan.
He retired. He was one of the pilots. He retired here in Columbus. I went to a speech he gave, and I saw the trigger that he had on one of the. He would bring it and he would talk about it. So when the IDF now is bombing into Gaza, they're using laser guided ordnance. And if you take a look at the videos that were posted yesterday, in parts of Gaza, they're still going out into the marketplaces. They're getting food. It's not the tunnel system has created a vacuum of what is a combatant, what is
Right.
Yeah.
and so
Can we transition about these tunnels to the border? I think it's because we have tunnel system across our border.
Well, it's an interesting segue, but before we do that, though,
please.
it's like, what is I sort of like my comment on history. It's like, what's the soldier's perspective on this? I mean, you've got civilians in the way of military targets, and on the ground, I get it. Soldiers follow orders, and they're supposed to follow orders, but they're also human beings. Like, what's the perspective on this?
I served with General Mattis when I was in the Marine Corps, and he put it the best way: if you have to take a shot to kill a civilian, it's going to create another. Don't do it. And I mean, just don't do it. And I think that the IDF has been pretty, has followed that pretty. They've offered aid, they've offered food, they've helped out.
Issued warnings. Hey, look,
we're going to bomb this building. It's like, hey,
there have even been a few ceasefires to exchange prisoners.
The Egyptians
and hostages.
And Hamas is. I mean, Egypt is not letting anybody through the Rafah Gate, which they could. It's a very part of it is we haven't seen this since Dresden. And that's the problem. We have not bombed, and maybe since in
Vietnam, you mean? Yeah, I mean, because
but we didn't bomb in Vietnam. We didn't bomb that many civilian areas.
Oh, that's right. No
with
question.
the exception of the in '69, at the end of '69, going into '70, where we bombed going into Hanoi. We did, but we very rarely dropped ordnance on civilian populations in Vietnam.
Right.
We haven't there's nothing that we have seen on the Ally system since Dresden. Now, with the Russians, they did this in Chechnya.
Well, a lot of people say Obama was a little loose with his drone kills, killing civilians.
He was.
Like he took out a whole wedding.
And he took out the school in Pakistan. I mean, he took out the medical system in Pakistan. And one of the problems that you have is again, it goes back to non-state actors, because this is one of the things we're battling on the border. So right now, the Sinaloa cartel at the border is acting the same way Hamas is.
Absolutely.
So you can go to a coyote, and the average cost to bring you over to the border right now, according to the people that I talked to that are in the the Texas State Militia, and is $8,000.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
And so you take somebody across. They have systems over there. They're using drones. They're using electronic surveillance. They're using what's called gap jumping broadcasting. So what they're doing is they're finding where the holes in the wall are, and they'll run people through them, and then they'll pull back, and then they have tunnels to go through this, to go through some of the, I don't want to say better patrolled areas, but once they get into the inside of the part of the U.S., they have mules, so they're going to get a person inside the border, and the way that this works is, if you have, let's just say you have Jose, okay, he travels across the border, he pays the system $8,000 to get them across the border. Then once they get in here, then they have a transport system that gets you to whatever the final destination city it is, whether it's San Francisco, Chicago, places that are, let's say, migrant friendly. Then the problem is that we have to, as on our side, we have to stop where the poorest, where the biggest surge is. The problem with that is there's so many people coming across, and when you're guarding one space, you leave another one open, and they're very good at this.
Yeah, and to your point of the $8,000, it's not like they have $8,000 on them. They owe that mule their life.
Well, they owe their mule their life,
coyote.
or they so
because they'll never pay it back.
The coyote.
Yeah,
they do.
coyote.
They
They
pay
never
back.
will. They'll be human trafficked the rest of their life.
Some will, some won't.
Yeah. There's the propensity that will happen. That's sad.
It is, but here's the thing. You can pay that back in numerous ways. You can work it off.
Right.
We had in Sandusky, Ohio, we had the raid on the processing plant. They had 200 illegals.
Yeah.
But here's the other way they'll pay it off. They'll launder that money for the cartel by sending that money back to Mexico to help out their families.
Right.
So there's if you go down right across the street from the casino, you have that mart down there
in Columbus here on Broad Street.
Yeah.
On Broad Street, there's the casino right across it is a huge. They use 4 different systems of sending money overseas. So if the cartel tells you, hey, you're going to send $1,000 to Juan Jose Fernando, then that's where you're going to say it. And it's the same thing with, I'm going to use another example, Somalia. We have Somalian migrants walking across the border. You have Syrian migrants. Well, in
Chinese.
And you have Chinese. And you send that money back to them. It is, if you earn it here, you can earn it here, send it back there. You're doing 2 things. You're getting migrants across the border, and now you're laundering money, which becomes an even better opportunity for the cartel.
Right. And Venezuelans are just dumping out their prisons and jails. This nut that killed that Laken Riley, he's a recidivist felon from Venezuela, and he had been stopped multiple times by law enforcement in the U.S. And he gets to remain.
If you're a country and you've got horrible, awful criminals, and you don't know what to do with them, and our borders are wide open.
Yeah.
Send them
it does
over,
sound like a solution, doesn't it?
Castro's Mariel boat lift.
Yeah, exactly.
He emptied out his
kind of
prison.
obvious, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, of course, you could say the whole United States was founded that way, but that's
or Australia.
Australia certainly was, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of it too is the fact is that our country was founded on guns. Let's be realistic. I mean, our guns have been used. And guns and violence have been used to find, this country, with the exception of maybe the Louisiana Purchase. But other than that, I mean, we settled this country with violence. I mean, it's, one thing I'd like to say is, hey,
humans always did. Back to antiquity.
Yeah, I mean,
I hate to mention a certain ancient Greek named Alexander.
Oh yeah, he was. But you know what though?
He's in Persia, hardly Greece.
Yeah, and one of the reasons he did that was the fact to push back the Persians. But the Persians were a little bit different, and their approach was like, hey, we have a bigger force than you. We can take you over, or you can ally with us. Keep your kingdom.
Yeah.
Just help us.
Well, to some extent, that is human migration.
That's right.
At its core. I mean, the Romans did it too. I mean, the Romans were in Britain, in the UK,
and the British, how they established their empire.
But we bring up a good point. Well, a point should be brought up, rather, I should say, and that is sort of when Rome became intolerant. That's when it failed. That's when the empire failed. Right, so it's like
and distracted, screwing around.
It sort of like what's happening now, right? A little bit.
Yes.
But when Rome fell, when they adopted Christianity.
Sure, because they became intolerant. Right.
That's when
the government mandated certain edicts from above on everybody, all their Roman citizens. And they defined citizens of everybody that their whole empire covered. That's when it became impossible, because then it's impossible to have that centralized rule over that big of an empire, which, looking at our country, our founders, the genius of it is that they didn't do that.
Well,
and we created the United States of America, and it was an association of different governments, association of different people with not necessarily all the same ideals. Similar, of course, but not all the same. And we could bring in a melting pot. And this is why the immigration problem is manifesting now, is because we're not controlling it in the way that we settled this country. We are letting people in to have their own culture within ours and not become Americans.
No. I'm going to push back on that. No. So I'm going to give you an idea. I have a friend of mine that we got out of Somalia on a provincial visa when we were in Somalia.
And he is a Somalian. Okay.
He is, 400 years Somalian. He lives in New Jersey. He was our translator. So when we were in Mogadishu, he was the guy we used as a translator. Got him out in Somalia. He got him to the refugee camp, got him through the UN. This is 1994, 95. He gets to the U.S. after being screened in the beginning of 95. His son, now Jamal is 100% Somalian, goes to he goes to the mosque, he goes to Juma prayers, he doesn't eat any of it. His son, his son is on Snapchat. His son is on.
Sure, he's becoming westernized, you would say.
Westernized, yeah. And what America does within 2 generations, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're German, Greek, French, Italian, you become American within 2 generations. There are now Mexicans that came here in the 80s under Ronald Reagan's the Immigration Reform Act. Their kids don't speak Spanish.
Correct.
But and fair enough. My pushback, though, is this is not what has always happened, though. What's going on now is totally different. I mean, we have people coming in with a different agenda altogether that we have no idea what it is even. I mean, we're speculating at this table what the cartels are doing. They're sending in criminals to launder their money. It's like,
we're not speculating.
We don't have a grasp on what exactly is going on. And, the schools aren't, there was a time when people came into the country and it was expected, not mandated, but it was expected that you would learn the language. Now, what you're saying is over time it happens anyway. So maybe it's 2 generations away. But I wonder if in 2 generations from now, you're going to be right, or in 2 generations from now, our country is not here anymore.
Well, George, let me jump in.
I get it. That's a little bit dramatic.
Let me jump in a little bit. I don't know if you meant to make it causational, if that's a word, when the Romans, and I think you're drawing an analogy to America, when Christianity took hold. So coincidence, it does not equal causality scientifically. So it could have been coincidental, not causal. Because in America, we're losing our shit here in this country as Christianity has declined. So I don't know if that's causal or just coincidental also.
Well, I think the fact
but
is
people
not
don't go to church anymore.
It could have been,
like they used to.
Islam.
I will push back on that.
Yeah.
There are more. Have you seen the Catholic Church's numbers?
Yeah, I am Catholic.
Yeah. They are not.
People are not in church like they used to be.
But they're not losing their. You might say that, but their donations are still equal. They're the Greek Orthodox Church.
They've closed down Catholic schools all over Columbus, for example. I mean, they're hurting. Basically,
both
because
those things can be true at once.
That's right.
Both those things can be true at once.
Basically, because of the perceived priest scandal, they lost a shit ton of Catholics.
The point, though, is not Christianity as it is. The point was when you cram it down and force people to do something, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, or some other religion, and you say all your citizens have to conform. That's when it becomes unwieldy. Well, and our country's never done that.
Rome fell a few times. Once under Nero, for example.
Well, he was just a lunatic, right?
And later Rome ascended again. Constantine named Istanbul Constantinople, because the Catholic Church was at that time not in Rome but in Constantinople. That's where the headquarters was. So they had conquered Persia at that point. So I mean, the barbarians took over Rome 2 or 3 times.
Well, and then they had that problem, but
it wasn't because of
You
Christianity.
just hate the Germans.
Yeah. Well, we yeah. But I think the problem when you're saying about the church here in America, let me point something out. Do you know when Halloween is?
Do I know when? Like a calendar date?
Yeah.
No, I don't trick or treat anymore. So
It's October. It's the
October 31st. Right?
Third.
Okay.
What happens the next day?
Well, All Souls Day.
Yeah.
They start playing Christmas music at every.
I know.
Oh,
I know. Oh, yeah, that too. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you can't go in November if November
Yeah, but
1st.
that's secular. That's secular.
That's secular.
That's a secular celebration of
Absolutely.
Christmas.
But think about this.
Correct.
I
As
mean,
is Halloween.
but at one time, Christmas was outlawed in parts of the United States. You could celebrate Christmas.
Well, Catholics were not allowed to own property in some of the colonies pre-America.
Well, and you got to remember, JFK was our first Catholic.
Right.
He was the first Irish Catholic president. So people looked at the Catholic Church as a.
They were worried the Pope would control John Kennedy.
Yeah. And it would have probably been better. He might have lived through Dallas. But the point of it is that the church in America has a lot of influence. The problem that we have is when they become absurd. When you have people like Joel Osteen, when you have Creflo Dollar, Ken Copeland, that shows you the absurdity of the church.
Well, I don't think they're controlling our culture at all.
Oh,
I'd have to agree, George. They probably a little bit more than you realize. I feel it at least, but I kind of wonder. To your point,
they just passed. Hold on.
Yeah,
Do you think
I don't know.
Alabama, the IVF rule that they passed in Alabama, is not based on a Christian doctrine?
Well, I think our entire country is founded on a Christian doctrine.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
No, Article 6 of the Constitution says otherwise. They didn't. You got to remember, they fought the 100-Year War prior to when England and France had fought a 100-Year War. Our founding fathers did not want Christianity into the.
They didn't want the government to adopt an official religion.
And Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. Ben Franklin was not a Christian. George Washington wasn't a Christian. So when you start talking about,
Well, I'm going to disagree with all that. But anyway, I think they all.
have you read the Thomas Jefferson Bible?
Yes.
But
But George, what are you trying to say exactly? Because if you think that conservative religion is running America today, I don't know what to. I don't know what to. There is so much degradation and so much sickness in our culture. We've slid down the hill in terms.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying there's parts of America.
I mean, the number one country for child prostitution is now America.
No, it's not.
Oh yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
Oh yeah, it is. Those girls coming across the border,
India is.
they're paying it off on their backside.
India is.
Well, that's not what the people who monitor child sex slavery are saying. They're saying America is now number one.
India has India has the largest enslaved population in the world right now. There are 21 million, and this is according to the UN. There are 21 million slaves in India. 21 million.
Okay.
Now, since 1990,
Right.
India has killed 30 million women. 30 million since 1990.
How have they done that?
Either through whatever you call it, infanticide, or through or through abortions.
Okay.
They have killed
Like China does.
Like China does. So, have you ever heard of the 882 plan? So, in China, there are towns in the history of the world. If you take a look at any country, anywhere in the world, it's 105.4 males at birth for 100 females. It's the only time that there's more males than females at birth. That's natural order. And then as males get older, they die off. It just happens. So in China, what has happened, and in other parts, and you can look this up, in other parts of India, there's 882 females per every 1,000 men. So what they're having a problem with it is that there's not enough females to go around. Now, if you take a look at what's going on in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka, they have said, hey, we need to slow down the birth rate. In India alone, the amount of sex trafficked females is absolutely horrendous. The two industries in India, and this is why I push back on the vegans, the most enslaved product in the world to produce, number one is coffee, number two is sugar, three is cashews. And India and they use slave labor for that. And India is using female, whatever you want to call it, prostitution, the sex trade, and they lead. Now, the U.S., we have a lot of sex trafficking, and it is going on.
And slavery. You mentioned Sandusky.
And we have slavery.
I live out by the egg farm in Croton. Okay, and we mentioned this a previous show. The largest fine by the Department of Labor in its history up to that time was against the egg farm for cramming South Americans, Mexican workers into unheated homes in the depth of winter. There would be 25, 30 men, all men, living in an unheated home, basically burning the floorboards for heat.
Yeah.
And so if that isn't slavery, now we wouldn't call it slavery because we're not keeping statistics like that in America. But with 12 million, since Biden became office, 12 million illegal immigrants into America, you said in India 22 million, 21 million. I'll bet you we're there. I'll bet we have that many people in this country that are economic slaves, if nothing else.
Oh, the economic slaves is not even... But
I'm just saying, man. But I'm not arguing with you.
No.
I'm just
arguments
saying
is fine.
Definitions are important here.
But part of the thing is that we have, and we have created a society here right now that we need cheap labor.
Yeah,
right.
And the problem has been
we want it.
Yeah, no. We've created a society that has available cheap labor. It's not that we need it, because if we didn't have it available, we would pay whatever the going rate is for labor, and everything would adjust.
True, yeah.
An orange would be $2 instead of $1.
It's not like this is economics is far more complex than that. There's too many forces at play to say we need cheap labor. We need cheap labor because we have it. And if we didn't have it, what would we do? Would we not have oranges? Would we not have our fruit picked? Would we not have our vegetables? I mean,
would we use robots instead of people?
At what point? It would change. There would be,
like Wendy's is doing,
multiple dynamics of change if we didn't have it available.
That's right.
Well, that's how they do.
This is what happens whenever
the reaper from an international harvester, that he created that because we didn't have the labor. So mechanical stuff came into play.
This is what happens whenever the government starts tinkering.
Eli Whitney's cotton gin was going to obsolete slavery in the South by just a few years.
But this is what happens when the government starts to tinker with the economic realities of the market and try to put its thumb on the scale of what it wants to incentivize. And there are always unintended economic consequences
to that.
Man.
And electric vehicles.
But you also got to remember, too, if the government doesn't get involved in economics, you have what you did in 1896. And that's a problem that people.
What happened in 1896?
J.P. Morgan had to lend the United States government money.
Oh yeah, the big bailout.
And so one of the things that you have is, and listen, I'm to the right of Genghis Khan. I mean, basically, with the exception, it's like I don't care if you get married, gay marriage.
I like how you said that. You didn't say it like John Kerry. Genghis Khan. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. John Kerry is. There's a few people I'm going to dance a jig when they pass on.
Yeah.
I have a plan for that. I have a plan.
And Senator Ketchup, invite me to your
So
jig.
number one on my list is Jane Fonda. That's the next one.
Hanoi Jane.
I can imagine.
And George Soros is right after that. But
he's Greek, right?
No, he's Jewish. He's Jewish.
He's Jewish. Yeah.
Okay.
He's Jewish.
I did not know that. Okay.
So one of the problems that we have going into this is that the government has had to step in because you look at the 1934 Stock Act. If the government doesn't step in, why do you have to have a law license to practice?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
because
Wouldn't the market fix that?
Abraham Lincoln didn't.
I think so.
You want to get me down this libertarian rabbit hole, I'll go with you because, look, I think that when the government steps in, when you point to the instances when the government has had to step in to fix things, you can almost always dial back the clock to some incidents where the government caused the problem they're now trying to fix and then take credit for fixing it. And
they have, but part of it that the government is reactionary, and we haven't. And there was things
That's right.
That there are things that have happened in the social structure that you have never seen, and they don't know how to. And it's always, we want to think that we're smart humans, but predictability, we don't know. I'll give you a prime example about this. In 1998, they had a UN meeting about cloning. Now, you think about this for a second. If you would have cloned, let's say, Bill Clinton, right?
Good God.
I mean,
Lord help us.
But
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You clone Bill Clinton, or you clone George Bush, or you clone a leader. Eventually, they're going to be, now you're going to have what's called cellular aging. But what happens if that person now commits a crime?
Right.
I mean, that is one of the things that they were arguing about, because if you obviously, you're a lawyer, and one of the things you have is a mens rea for committing a crime, right? When you have to defend, people. Mm-hmm. What happens to that? And so they said, no, we're going to outlaw cloning. And the only country as of today that has cloned people that they've been able to
human embryos is China.
Human embryo is North Korea.
I thought it was China.
Look, I'm not suggesting that the government has no role in the economic structure of our society, and I don't think you're suggesting that they should have a complete role to engineer it. Somewhere the curves cross.
Yes,
and I think our government has crossed it many, many, many times in the past, and then come in later like the heroes to solve the problem that they created. I mean, the housing crisis in 2008 is a perfect example of that. And there's dozens and hundreds of others if you just go back in history.
The response to COVID-19.
COVID's a perfect example. Right.
I mean, Dr. Phil got on The View this week, right? And he horrified the women there by saying the solution to COVID, the programs put in place by the government, caused more harm to children than COVID itself.
So this is in
But
usually,
Obama caused COVID.
Well, a lot of those policies.
No.
A lot of those.
I'm going to
finish it up.
In 2014, again, look this up.
Funding the lab is what
No.
Well, they said he can't fund the lab, and then he redefined what funding meant.
I wanted to put. So part of the things that we worked on is I study. I was working on on mitochondrial repair with applied compounds, and that is to help veterans. We have a product, and I'm not going to segue on. We have a product that we've introduced in the marketplace that is helping cellular repair for veterans that have been exposed to burn pits and to certain health factors when they've been deployed. This is why. 2014, there's a doctor by the name of Warner. Came out and said, we need to come up with an antiviral peptide. $500 million would have cost. That's it. And him, you can look him up on the NIH. He said, if we develop this antiviral peptide, we will be able to fight diseases like COVID. COVID is infectious bronchitis. It was in 2004. There's a doctor by the name of Sanan Yuruglu. He's a Turk. And you know how difficult it is for me to give him.
Calm down.
It's to give him credit for this. He did the vectors on COVID, SARS, MERS, and COVID, and he did the vectors. So we had a blueprint of how to fight it. If they would have listened to him in 2014 and said, "Hey, we could have came out with an antiviral peptide," we would have never had the issue with COVID.
I thought I'd heard this story before at that point in time.
And the problem has been that these people that are in charge, they vote against our own best interests.
I mean, closing schools down for 2 years in some states. I mean the destruction. Yeah. We had teen suicides. We had all kinds of stuff.
We were not prepared for it.
Well, and to your example too, I think what they were thinking was going to happen was mind-boggling. I think they came back and said, this can't happen. There's no way the world could be affected by one thing. Wasn't it that little bit of a mindset that it was just, it's an impossibility. How could that happen?
And the problem is that we kick the can down the road
right.
until it becomes an issue. We could have fixed the border when George Bush and Nancy Pelosi were in office. They could have passed an immigration reform bill. And
dude, post 9/11, Bush could have gotten anything in that in the next 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
That was the time, George Bush II, after 9/11, when we knew it was illegal immigrants that were flying those planes. They had overstayed their visas, several of them, which made them illegals.
Right.
And that was the time to harden our border, our southern border. And he could have gotten it. He could have said, listen, it's foreigners that came into our country that we didn't know where they were or what they were doing. And we should now absolutely know 100% every person that comes in, vet them, and end this bullshit. And he could have done it. And that was a big failure on Bush's part.
And part of the government is, and I will tell you this, Debt of Honor came out. Tom Clancy wrote a book called Debt of Honor, where these whatever you want to call them, terrorists fly 747 into the Capitol building. Okay, and if you take a look at the book Debt of Honor, and they had this scenario planned
absolutely
in war games numerous times.
The one that hit the Pentagon was hunting for the White House, wasn't it?
No. The one that went down
in Pennsylvania, that was the one hunting for the White House?
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the problems is some things sound so absurd that they do not think they will work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in World War II, going back to this, there is a German sub, I think it was 851. I'd have to look up the number, but it was in New York Harbor. And they wanted to basically I think it's called the Bowery, whatever you want to, they wanted to blow up that part of New York Harbor to stop ships coming out. They tried to, one of the other things that they had done is that there was another German U-boat that made it into the Philadelphia Naval Yard. And we just don't think people that until recently, where you have the fifth generation warfare, you don't think that people are going to do things. Right. It just goes back to Hamas. No one on the Israeli government says, wait a second, these guys are going to take paragliders and, come into a music festival and attack our citizens? Nah, come on.
Like Batman.
Like Batman.
Right.
And so
when you push a society so far, they have nothing to lose. They're going to do the unbelievable.
Right. And I don't, the Palestinians lost whatever credibility in 1972 when they one of my biggest pushbacks in Palestinians, and I've trained in Israel.
What hijacking you're talking about and the Munich Olympics?
Now, I want you to point, I want to give you a story about this because I post this story all the time. My coach in Greco-Roman wrestling was a guy by the name of Pavel Katzin. Pavel Katzin and Mark Slavin were counterparts. Mark Slavin is one of the Israeli athletes that was killed. He was a Greco-Roman wrestler. He won the European Championships earlier that year in I think it was in April. He beat the second guy in his pool. He beat him 8-0. I mean, just crushed him. He was the favorite to win the gold medal for the Israelis in 1972 in Munich.
Right.
Now imagine this. On the podium in Greco-Roman wrestling, or at the podium at the Olympics, you're going to play the Israeli national anthem a mere 45 miles away from a concentration camp that killed, 400,000 Jews. Imagine the national healing that would have done. Mm. The Israeli national team, now Dave Bergen is here from, he had already competed, but Mark Slavin was the favorite to win Greco. The amount of national healing that would have done would have pushed back years.
And for the German people.
Also.
As well, yes.
And it wasn't until 1992 in Barcelona that the first Israeli athlete won a gold medal. That's how far back it pushed back. And so when you're looking at cause and effect,
right,
one little incident can, push back everything else. The Jordanians, which are second highest ally in that area, they took in 300,000 Palestinians, refugees. The Palestinian refugees wound up killing their prime minister. This is in the 70s. So part of the problem that you have in these dynamics is that once you start down a certain path, there's no way of stopping it. As far as the people that are coming now, this is the Henry Cabot Lodge argument. When you had the WAPs coming across, everybody was, when you had the Germans in 1917, there was like 700 German national newspapers.
That's right.
And so
right here, right in Cincinnati, German Village.
Village. I want to go to Schmitz and get a cream puff right now. You have no idea.
But there were German language newspapers. Was your point that there were enclaves of Germans? And
in World War II, we had to take we created the 442nd because we had the Japanese internment camps. They would not. They took the Japanese troops to send them over to Europe to fight.
Well, they volunteered.
I'd use the term volunteer loosely.
Well, people like Daniel Inouye volunteered, right? And so I take your point. Brett said this is what happens when you push people too far. I don't think any population has ever been pushed too far as have black slaves and ex-slaves, and whether you go back to the Civil War era, or whether you talk about the 60s. And there was a schism there between the Martin Luther King peaceful protesting, peaceful blowback versus, say, the Black Panthers. And so Hamas had, and the Palestinians in general have had historical opportunities to have a two-state solution. The West Bank is self-governing. It is a Palestinian, in a way. Hang on, George, just for a second. It is in a way a Palestinian state. Jordan itself is made up mainly of Palestinians. It was Gaza where Hamas was elected, probably in crooked elections. Not that we know anything about that here, of course. But Hamas got elected to run Gaza, and the Gazan people basically are along for the ride. So when you say you can only push people so far, it was rockets from Gaza going into Israel. I'm not sure what Israel was doing to the Gazans.
Yeah, Hamas was not pushed in any way, shape, or form that would warrant what they did.
Exactly.
It's what you're really trying to say.
That's right.
But if you want to stop,
that's nonsense.
But if you want to stop, again, who's causing this? The Persians. And until you go invade, but think about it.
I have no love for
the Iranians, but the Iranians are funding Hezbollah. They're funding Hamas.
Yeah,
and they funded.
And who gave them all this money? Obama and Biden. I mean, in the middle of the night, U.S.
But that was their money, though. But that was their money. And hold on. And listen.
So we're financing that.
I'm not
by
a fan
giving
of
them their money back.
Here's the problem.
It's Shaw money, and we gave it back to them.
We had Irish presidents. I'm going to tell you this. It's the Irish that cause everything. I'm going to tell you this. From Eisenhower.
Now, they would say the British caused it.
No.
But go ahead.
From Eisenhower to Trump. Trump was the first non-Irish president since Eisenhower.
Oh, wow. I got to digest that.
Okay. Let's go down the list.
Oh, wow.
No, you don't have to. I know all the
JFK, Irish. LBJ, Irish. Nixon, Irish. All of them down there. Obama, Irish. Every single one of them. Well, but think about it. His mom is a Dunham, and there's a post online. Clinton, Irish. Hillary, Irish. We've had Irish presidents in office since Eisenhower. Maybe
I miss the Hillary presidency, but I take your point.
But Hillary was. But there's a whole thing. He's an Irish in Cork, I think, that he's drinking a Guinness, and there's a whole article that Obama and his Irish roots. The problem that you have again
is Obama called Obama because he's Irish?
There's an apostrophe in there,
like O'Brien.
But part of the things that we're talking about, the southern border, all of that is caused by non-state actors. You have the Sinaloa cartel.
Yeah.
You have the Zetas.
Oh yeah. Right.
And you have
they got a truce going with MS-13 now.
Now, guess who the number one country in South America that is exporting cocaine is? Ecuador.
Really?
They just had the Ecuadorian had a faction go into their national TV and shot. You can see the video on it. It's on there. Shot a couple people at their station, took over and said, "Hey, listen, we're in charge." And Ecuador is now moving cocaine to
sounds like Seattle. When they took that block that included the police station.
And so now at the southern border, what we're having to do is they're not transferring drugs over the southern border at a high rate. You're not going to put Juan Fernando Alejandro Rojas with maybe 2 keys on his back. That's why they just found 130 tons or 130 pounds of cocaine is washing up on Florida, on the coast of Florida, because they're bringing it through, maritime.
There are more efficient ways for them to do it, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
And, which also scares me is because they had a alligator eating cocaine that went on a rampage.
Can you imagine that? There was a movie about the cocaine bear.
It was cocaine bear, and a cocaine bear is a real story.
It's a real story.
That's what's scary about it. But now what they're doing is they're forcing at our southern border. DeSantis sent the Florida militia to, I'm just going to give you a little FYI. So the Florida militia is a state militia. DeSantis sent 400 of the personnel to Texas to help, along with the Florida State Patrol.
Just so people don't think it's like nutters, ex-NRA guys like the Michigan. Unofficial militia, the Florida militia
is an official state militia,
and many of those people are highway patrol. Like they wear another hat.
Yeah, they're and so in 1902 they passed what's called the Dick Act. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not. So it quantified in the federal government what is the National Guard and what is a militia. So the National Guard can be federalized. So, for example, if you have a National Guard unit here in Ohio that is like the 237th was nationalized, if you nationalize,
like George Wallace, Eisenhower nationalized the National Guard in Bama,
right,
and said you're going to let these kids go to this school.
So the difference between the National Guard and the Army Reserve is this: the National Guard has to be federalized unit-wise. The Army Reserve can pull up one soldier from a reserve unit to fill an active duty need. Okay. So if you're in the reserves and you're a corpsman, let's say, I'll give you a prime example. If you're a corpsman and they need a couple corpsmen, they will activate you, get you onto national service to deploy wherever you want. Now the state militia, like Ohio has a state militia. Mm-hmm. Texas has what's called the Texas Militia. There are 1,800 members. Give or take. They've activated them to go down to the border. Now, some of them have arrest powers. Now, in Ohio, the sheriffs have arrest powers, the police have arrest powers, and they're depending on, in times of emergency, the Ohio militia can have arrest powers. And so this is a very complicated issue, but part of the problem is you have non-state actors that are pushing people to cross the border, mm-hmm. whether it's for monetary gain or, they're sending them to New York, and now they're issuing, the mayor of New York issued credit cards for $1,000 a month for these migrants, and it's going to cost them $53 million so they can buy food and diapers. And I can understand that, but the problem at the border is there are so many moving parts, and there's no easy solution other than to stop everybody from coming across, then figure out a way how to make the border more secure.
Well, there is an easy solution. You just do that. I mean, and that's
right.
That we have done that in the past, or at least done some version of that in the past.
That's right.
The problem is and this is relevant to what Texas is trying to do here, because the problem is the federal government has sort of looked the other way, and
as a policy,
and so we do have tools in place. We don't need more legislation to fix this. We have, it's historically been dealt with.
Remain in Mexico.
It's not perfect,
for
of
God's
course.
sakes.
But remain in Mexico, vet the legitimate ones, and let them in.
One of your Marines that is now running for office out in California.
Which one?
Is her name is
Kate Monroe?
That's right, Kate Monroe.
That's my friend.
She is buying razor wire and patching holes in the fences along the California-Mexico border. And the Border Patrol is showing her where the holes are, and they're saying Joe Biden won't let us patch that hole, but we'll show you where the hole is, Kate. And Kate, who's running for Congress down there in San Diego, you go down there if you want to. I mean, what kind of madness is this? Like Steve says,
this is the problem, and this is the
federal
case.
Government has.
So Abbott in Texas tried to pass law, Senate Bill 4, and the law basically says we're going to take over the Border Patrol. I'm grossly summarizing it, but they're going to take over the duties of what the federal government heretofore did before. And is that the right way to say it? Did it before?
Yeah,
heretofore.
I like
is a stupid way to say
I
it.
like that.
But
because under the invasion clause,
and the Supreme or the court down in Texas has enjoined enforcement of that law. And I think it's important to understand what that means. I mean, it's not like they've said the law is unconstitutional. What they've said is we're not going to permit you to enforce that law yet until we vet it and make sure that it's constitutional. But when a court does that, almost always they're foreshadowing that they're going to strike the law as unconstitutional. This is the problem with the law. It violates on its face,
common
says
sense.
the court. The Texas law violates the supremacy clause because the power to protect the border and enforce the border is vested with the federal government constitutionally. Now the question is whether this, quote, invasion clause permits it. And we've talked about this in another show where how do you define an invasion? Because the invasion clause is designed where there's an immediate invasion coming in and the federal government doesn't have time to act and declare war, et cetera. So is immigration an invasion? I think not. I think generally speaking not. Certainly not in accordance with the history, text, and tradition of the Constitution. That's how I would see it. But it really,
was never anticipated that this would ever happen. Yeah, you're right.
So the way this has to get sorted out is we have a fundamental failure of the federal government to do what it's supposed to do. And what the heads are coming together here where, all right, how do we handle that? We've never had to deal with this.
We've impeached Mayorkas,
so,
right?
Well, sort of.
Well,
yes, we have impeached.
Yeah,
he's not going to be convicted in the Senate. But
he won't be convicted. But that is the solution.
That is the solution. Ultimately, the federal government has to solve it at the federal level.
That's right.
Just because the federal government derelicts its duty to do what it's supposed to do doesn't mean the states get to take over that job. That's sort of what this court is saying. Now, the problem is, what if the federal government doesn't fix it? And then what do we have? And this is where I am concerned sort of philosophically about where our country's going. Because if the federal government is going to, through executive action, which is what this is, intentionally not going to do things. And I don't care what political side you're on, because this can manifest itself on both sides depending on who's in power.
Sleeper cells.
And
terrorism.
If the federal government is intentionally going to invoke a policy or a practice or an agenda by either enforcing or not enforcing laws that are on the books or not performing their duty, what are the state's obligations? This is like we're going back to sort of fundamental federalist questions like
states' rights.
This is John Adams.
Yeah, this is
That's
what
right.
do we do?
This is a federalism debate.
The last time we tackled this problem, folks, was a civil war.
Yes,
right.
Right.
And it resulted in a civil war.
No, we've had states, we've had instances of states violating the Logan Act.
Yeah,
and part of the other, look at Celeste. I mean, Celeste negotiated with Japan to bring Honda to Ohio. And people forget that. I mean,
fair enough, but that's the problem in reverse. What we have here is the federal government not doing something and the states picking up the slack.
And the problem is and again, it goes back to one tenet. And if I'm not in charge, and I would love to be in charge, but I can't. But the fact is,
we'd be at war with Iran.
Oh yeah,
and Ireland.
No. I'd be
and the Irish.
The first thing I would do is I would take over Constantinople. That'd be the first thing.
So it's not Istanbul.
No, it's
Constantinople.
I like that he still calls it Constantinople.
It's Constantinople. Number two, I would, number two is that I would deploy a division to the border and seal the border.
Absolutely.
And then,
right.
Number three is if you're going to, the way to fix the border maybe is, do a Henry Cabot Lodge. Maybe. The problem is that.
Well, you know what they used to do. Were you ever a member of the NRA and get American Riflemen?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember a columnist in there called Bart Skelton?
Oh, yeah.
A Customs and Border Patrol guy, right? He wrote an essay I'll never forget. I should find it and put it on the show. But he wrote an essay about what they used to do when somebody would not obey a Border Patrol guy. They'd shoot them dead. They'd shoot them dead right in the desert.
1935.
And the buzzards and the coyotes would eat that body. And he said, we'd leave that body out there as a stinker, as a warning to other people who did not heed our warnings.
You could say that would solve the problem. It's certainly not the best way to solve the problem.
Well, he's saying he put a division down there. That's violence.
The first thing I would do is I would seal the border.
Yeah,
number two is
that's using force.
And
just a show of force might be enough.
And the one thing that, and I want you to think about something that because I've been, like I said, I talk to people, down at the border because a lot of them are veterans and stuff like that. So the Arizona militia is actually starting to go into the border. What has not happened at the border yet?
Well, there hasn't been a shooting like you're talking about.
No migrant has crossed with a weapon. Have you noticed that? Not one migrant, not one illegal, not one asylum seeker has crossed with a weapon.
That we have heard about.
Yeah. That we have heard about. And that is done on purpose by the cartel. Because the first time that happens, they turn them into combatants. Oh. And going back to the, and then so.
And the invasion clause all of a sudden comes into play.
And the cartel isn't stupid. Because what they're, here's
one
of the.
No, they're not.
And here's one of the reasons they're doing this at the border is because if we're deploying resources to stop the migration move, what they're not doing is stopping the influx of drugs and other mechanisms.
Yeah, that's fentanyl.
And so there's only one fentanyl manufacturer in North America, and that's in Mexico, and that's owned by the Zetas, not the Sinaloas. And so now
and the precursor chemicals are coming from China.
Yeah, precursor. And so the problem is, how do you fix? Because now, one of the things that you can argue about is in the U.S. right now in the sanctuary cities where people are bringing in migrants. The people that are getting upset are the people the lower hanging labor participants. However you want to. Right. I don't know. I don't know.
Getting welfare money like in Chicago. It's pissing off the locals. Like, why do these people get to live here for free, get free groceries, get free this, free that, and we don't get the benefits they get?
Well, look, this is a problem. These are natural problems that result from the sort of original sin here. Once you open up the border, then you have to deal with it.
Yes.
And it sounds great, but we have this immigration. We're here to help.
We love everybody.
We love everybody. But now you have to deal with the problems that are getting created in the sanctuary cities. Are starting to realize that. I think the common citizen are starting to everybody's now. It's in your backyard. Well,
now girls can't go running on a sports path in Georgia.
As you have pointed out, they are not necessarily all going to be the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts coming across the border. No. These are hardened people who are willing to go do these. So at the end of the day,
military age,
as you said, George, the problem needs to be solved at the border. We can solve the problem at the border, and that sort of takes care of the rest of this. But the government, the U.S. government, the federal government under the Biden regime is not willing to do it. And you can ask why, and we can speculate as to why.
Well, but they just had a bill going into Congress that the Republicans voted against also.
I wouldn't have voted for that bill either, because what that was
no.
It was political jostling.
But our government. Here's the problem that I have is that here, I want the people in Congress, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or individual, I want them to vote on the best interests of the American people.
But that compromise allowed 5,000 people per day before Biden was authorized to shut the border down,
but
which translates into 4 million people.
But since 2008, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just see. Since 2008, what have, other than the Dodd-Frank Act, which is, you can argue whether this is done, what piece of legislation has Congress passed that has been beneficial to both sides?
What both sides? You mean Americans?
Americans.
In the last how many years?
Since 2000, since Dodd-Frank.
That wasn't passed during Biden.
No. I'm saying to you this. Since 2008, since Obama took office in 2009.
Okay.
All right. I have a master's in public policy. I went back through it. Very few bills have made it through Congress.
Well, Congress doesn't do anything anymore. They pass one omnibus bill a year and then bitch and moan about everything else.
They haven't done anything to benefit.
Everything's in the Federal Register now. It's done by agencies.
Until Trump got into office, we had a guy. This is, and so we've made a couple adjustments. We had a guy in Phoenix go to the VA and kill himself in the parking lot. We had another guy set himself on fire in the parking lot.
Right.
But
there's no law that would prevent that.
No. Yes, there was.
What?
The Duty of Care Act, which is what Trump helped in streamlining the VA.
Well, you're talking about reform of the VA, but
I'm saying is that very few things that our government has done in the last 16 years can we look and say, yeah, that was very...
George, I'll go back 50 years. Our government has been run by administrative agencies and executive edict.
You'll get no argument here, man.
You know, going back since we've been alive.
They had the head of the... and I'm going to tell you this. My view on the Second Amendment is, again, I'm to the right of Genghis Khan. I think if you could afford an 810, I think you ought to be able to buy an 810. I don't, you ought to be able to buy a tank.
An A10 Warthog?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'd like one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if that
Intel project out by me be a smoking crater.
And
just give me a Warthog, baby. And I'm in.
And so I'm
in.
And because I think that the head of the ATF, the largest, whatever you want to call them, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, came on there and could not describe what a cyclic rate of an AR-15 was.
These are executive appointees. The administrative state of government is controlling, is supplanting the legislative branch of government.
No question about it.
And you can go back to thank Wilson for this, I suppose.
Yeah, the current fisherman case is a gorgeous example.
So we have a court that hopefully will do away with this.
We'll get
away from the Chevron doctrine and the deference doctrine. But at any rate, we probably ought to wrap it up. I know we've been at it here for a while. So look, George, this has been great.
I'm so excited. We've had a guest on that wants to let people own an A10 Warthog. Dude,
that's a first.
I mean,
I'm telling you.
I'm so stimulated.
Could you imagine, you think about this. Could you imagine if look, part of the problem is that if you take a look at countries in history,
depleted uranium.
Oh my God!
Sabo rounds. Oh my God!
I mean,
what that would do to Intel's basement. Oh, for God's sakes!
But the problem,
I don't want any people hurt. I go out there at about 4 in the morning with my
favorite president of all the presidents I've ever studied is Thomas Jefferson, bar none. He is my absolute. I think he did more for this country than any other president.
He wrote
the Declaration of Independence.
If nothing else, the Louisiana Purchase.
He sent the two guys out west.
Yeah. But I mean, if you think about it, he wrote the Declaration of Independence in a second-story house. He was upstairs for the summer, and then now they made revisions. John Adams helped him, and Ben Franklin helped him. And so, what was his other Watterson? Who's the other one?
They passed it around. Yeah,
they passed it around. Yeah. But he wrote it by himself, and then they made changes. And he then said, the rights of a free man the government should never restrict him from owning weapons.
Yeah, right.
And The problem that you have with that is we forgot that our government is becoming to a point we don't trust the average citizen.
Oh, God, no.
It should be the opposite.
Yeah.
But,
It should be the
he was
opposite.
awesome. Lewis and Clark. I mean, the list goes on and on of what Thomas Jefferson.
Well, look, we got to wrap it up.
Yes.
George, you've got we should have introduced you before with a little bit more detail, but anyway, go back and listen to the biography before. But
Exactly.
The Vet Radio Syndicate, you've got your own show, you've got your own website, you've got your own Facebook page, and it's growing and growing and growing from what I can tell. All sorts of vet services, folks. If you have any interest in it, and you should, go back a few weeks, listen to our sort of deep dive into what George is doing with the vets and how impactful it really is on not only a personal level but also bigger policy levels too. So really, really great stuff. With that, we're going to wrap it up. This has been brought to you by Harper Plus Accounting. My accountant could be yours. All you have to do is make the call to Harper Plus Accounting. We have all sorts of things that you can check out on our website at commonsenseohioshow.com. Norm, you're doing a great job keeping the Facebook page updated with reels and videos.
We doubled our viewership.
It's because George has been on
in a week.
That helps.
Absolutely. So, George, we have reels of you on our Facebook page.
Really?
Of just you. You're the only guy talking. So,
Really?
yeah.
Imagine that.
So,
Right.
thank you.
Well, look, coming at everybody right from the middle here at Channel 511, at least until now.